welcome everybody to our 8th Kazzie Connect, and I'm really delighted tonight by popular demand to bring back Nik, Justin and Stasi, but we've got actually a special guest tonight in Kerry. So can we have Kerry up on the screen?
Yeah, there she is.
Hello, Kerry.
Hi, Lena.
Welcome. I'd like to quickly introduce Kerry. She is president of the KAV Club, but also a senior financial planner in her own right, and is part of strategic financial planning. So welcome, Kerry, to our little get-together we have every month, us Kazzies and friends, and we're delighted to have you as part of our group. So what I'd like to do now is just do a little bit of housekeeping before we get the session started, sorry. So if everybody could mute themselves, and if you can kindly wait until the end of the event and jot down your questions, and our guests will be happy to answer them then. So Justin, I'd like to hand over to you now to actually go over the disclaimer. So Carolyn, can you pop that up on the screen for us?
Thanks, Lena. So it'll, excuse me, it'll come up in a sec. Basically, we just got a little disclaimer coming up just to explain to everyone that we're presenting general information tonight, and it's for information about property, but it's a general in nature. So it's not specific advice for anybody. And if anyone needs specific advice, obviously they're encouraged to go see their financial planner, accountant, or other advisors, or speak to one of us offline, and we'll happily help them out.
Thank you, Justin. That's terrific. Now, if everybody could mute, I'm actually going to now introduce our fearless leader, the president of the Kastellorizians here in Victoria, Nik Spartels, and he's also a property developer in his own right. Nik, how are you?
How are you, Lena? Thank you.
I'm pretty good. Now, I've got some pretty serious questions for you here. So I want to go over with you, what are the tips that you can give us about when buying a property?
And before I go on to answer your question, I had a lovely phone call this week from Sourasis in Perth, congratulating yourself and the Kazzie Club for putting this on, the Kazzie Connect. So look, it's very, very worthwhile getting interstate people getting online with us and enjoying what we're doing. So thank you. And I'd like to welcome Kerry, Sourasis, as you said, the president of the KAV Club, a lovely lady and very intelligent lady, I must add. Welcome again, and thank you for coming on tonight.
Too kind, Nik. Thank you.
The question, buying property, well, I'll start off now.
Tell the truth.
Okay, well, I might have a bit of a blue here with Stasi tonight, being the real estate agent, but I'm on the other side of the fence here. Buying property at auctions. Now, the main way of purchasing a property in Melbourne, in Australia and around the world. And it's got me buggered why a lot of people can't do it themselves. Now, a lot of people actually get buyers advocates to come in and pay 2, 3, 4, 5% to represent them or to do the bidding on their behalf. Now, with a buyer's advocate, of course, they don't get paid unless they buy the property. So they've got no interest to me by trying to save the potential purchaser money. So again, to me, I still can't understand why people get them in. Starting an auction and looking at people bidding straight away, it's got me bothered too, because a lot of people just start putting their hands up and they start running themselves up. So they'll start at 1.5 and next thing they'll end up at 1.9 within seconds. So what I usually do is I know that the agents will possibly go in. There's 90% chance that the agents will go back into the house and speak to the vendors and communicate and say, right, we've got X amount of dollars. What do you think? We've got 2 bidders out there. We'll go on the market. We'll go out there and let's put on the market. So I always wait until the end. So once they come out for the second time or at the end, I start bidding. Now, a lot of people are very scared to bid. They go like this when they bid. They put their hand up and go like that. I'm very vocal, and I think to get a property nowadays, you have to show power. And the power that I've got is by yelling out 5 or 10,000 straight away as soon as someone puts a bid in. So at the end of the process, that's when I come in and just go bang, bang, bang. Now, sometimes I'll put 10 in and then I'll go another 10. And they say, sir, it's your bid anyway. I say, I don't care. I'm bidding against myself. I'll go again. They think, oh, this guy's an idiot or he's got plenty of money. So again, that's a way of showing power when trying to purchase a property. And to me, the main thing is as soon as someone else throws a bid in, I'll just go bang straight away. There won't be a delay because again, that's showing your power and possibly you've got a good chance of getting the property. Now, Stasi will say something probably about what I've just said, but that's how I usually go at auctions. Now, with private auctions, which is very rare to buy, but sometimes the last 12 months I will say now that it's very common. If an agent comes over to my house and someone wants to pay $2 million or wants to sell the house for $2 million and I want to pay $1,950 for it, I'll go to the agent, please put down 1.9, cross it out and put 1.950 because I want to get it $50,000 cheaper if I can. And they say, why are you doing that for? I said, because I'm making you look good, mate. You've taken me up from 1.9 to 1.950. So, and you get, like, it's a bit of a game. It's a bit of a game. And I suppose you learn it through experience, how to conduct yourself when you're purchasing a property.
Okay, so assuming we've bought the property, what's the next steps we should take once we've got that and we've signed before we actually, hand over the deposit, etc.?
Okay, so when you're signing the Section 32, which is what it's called in Melbourne, I think the other states are a bit different, but the first thing I check, Lena, is on the fixtures and fittings on a contract, it's a very, look, you have to add in and the dishwasher, because a lot of places that you purchase, it's fixtures and fittings. A fixture is known as a fixed item. Now, people don't realise that a dishwasher is not a fixed item and it can be pulled out before settlement if it's not mentioned on the Section 32. So I always tell people to put, with the fixtures and fittings, to put and dishwasher. Which is only, look, it's probably a $2,000 oversight, but look, it's still $2,000, and to some people, it's a lot of money. So that's something I learnt the hard way. So look, I make sure people go over the contract, make sure there's no caveat on the property, and then you should go and put a caveat on the property so that they can't on-sell it to someone else. Also, a lot of people don't realise once they sign a Section 32, you have an interest in that property, and when you've got an interest in that property, you have to take out insurance straight away, because if anything happens to that property, if it burns down, there could be the onus could be on you because you're the last purchaser. So to be safe, and a lot of people aren't told this, you need to go get a cover. Even though you've just signed it on that day, immediately get a cover on that property. So are you
saying, Nick, that if you're walking through a property and you're looking on the market and you're walking through and you ask for a Section 32, you've committed, but you haven't signed it, you're okay. It's once you sign that Section 32?
And handed over the deposit. It could be 1 cent. It could be $1. As long as there's been a transaction, and it's signed, that's deemed as a contract. But as I said to you, once you sign that contract, you get on the blower, you ring up your insurance broker and you say, listen, I've just bought exit so-and-so street. I need to put an insurance cover on it straight away. So they're things that people don't realise.
That's really valuable information, but I want you to share with us as well, and possibly for those that are first time buyers, or for those listening want to pass this information on, what would be the key things for first-time buyers that they should really consider?
Look, basically, with a first-time buyer, you have to set your limit. I think when you're starting out, there is limitations. I mean, if you've already bought your first or second property, I think you're pretty financial and you can go that extra 20, 30, 40, $100,000. So that's the main thing. To me, get into the market. like, even if you can't afford to buy a house, just go and buy a flat. At least you're in it. I mean, it'd have to go up 10% every year if you buy in a good area. And as I said, you're in the market. So that's the main thing. Another thing, a lot of people with who are first-time buyers, they go get pre-approval with their money. Now, they've got to realise that a pre-approval from a bank is computer generated. It's not actually 100% signed that you're going to go and purchase a flat for $600,000 and we're going to give you 400. So they can just say, right, we're giving you pre-approval, but once you have purchased that property, you go back to your bank and say, right, I've purchased a property, you've given me a pre-approval of 400,000, can I have it? They're going to turn around and say, no, we have to go through and make sure your debts are all right. You're not going to restaurants every night. You're not going on holidays 3 times a year, that you haven't got pets, which cost $10,000 a year to run. So people have got to be aware that they've got to go to their bank and say, right, I don't want pre-approval, I want total approval. So that's what catches a lot of young kids out and first-time buyers.
Okay, so Nik, if you were a first home buyer, I mean, we all can't afford Toorak, Brighton, etc., but what would be the areas that you would suggest that you're going to get a bit of capital growth, especially if you're going to buy a flat or an apartment, etc., to get into the market?
Well, obviously, as I think Stasi said last time about, look, you've got to be in areas that are close to the city. To me, the city's the nucleus of the state. So wherever you can buy close to the city, getting on a train now and getting into the city within 20 minutes, that's all right. You've got to buy near proper infrastructure. So that's the main thing that people have got to look at, not to buy out the sticks and they have to take 2 hours to get to the city. So that's what people have got to look up.
So why, there's a lot of talk out there on the market and, nobody knows whether the bubble's going to burst or if in fact after we open up, it's going to get more expensive. But I mean, why during COVID, we're still in lockdown, are prices going through the roof, and there's been an extraordinary amount of homes that are being bought online and sight unseen? Well,
what I think has happened over the last 12 months, it's called FOMO. Now, that's fear of missing out on getting a property. People want to get into the market and they think, oh, geez, if I don't buy now, we're going to be in trouble. I'll never be able to get into the market. So that's what people embed into their heads, into their minds to go out. Another thing is interest rates are so low at the moment. And that's why people are paying a premium getting into the market. But as you can see this week, Westpac now have put up their fixed interest rates. They're starting to climb a little bit. So this wasn't supposed to happen to 2023, but they've only put it up 0.1. But look, it's starting to take off a little bit. So another thing why people are getting into paying top dollar for properties is they're pulling their money out of the bank because they're earning nothing on interest. So that to me is probably the main thing. And we haven't been going overseas and haven't been going out to restaurants. So I think people have got plenty of money in the bank now. They've saved a lot over the last 18 to 24 months, and they've been able to say, right, we've got all this money saved up, let's put it into property. And they're the 4 reasons I think why our property market has increased.
Actually, I'm just going to throw a question in. I hope you don't mind, Justin. This one's probably for you. But traditionally, the cycles have been that when the property market escalates, it's usually the investment or the stock market goes down. But at the moment, they seem to be neck and neck. I mean, what do you put that down to?
I think since the GFC, which is 2009, 2010, all these traditional cycles about economics and the way it all works, I think, have changed. I think, later on, Kerry will mention it's about diversifying your portfolio rather than just saying I'm all in property or I'm all in shares. So I think the old cycles, I mean, we didn't have pandemics when we were learning economics and learning how the property market works. So I think a lot of that's been thrown out the window because we know as soon as they open the floodgates in Melbourne, they're saying instead of in Australia 100,000 skilled migrants. They say they're going to need 200,000 skilled migrants. Well, what's that going to do to property prices in Melbourne when they eventually come here? So I think it's very different to the way it used to be. But to Nik's point, you've got to get on the property treadmill and buy somewhere rather than sitting back and watching and waiting for the perfect property. And it might not be somewhere where you live first up.
Yeah, thank you, Justin, and thanks. I know I threw that one in, but I thought it was valuable to know. Nik, thank you very much. I'm sure that people are going to take away a lot from what you've just said. And what I'd like to do now is actually hand over to Kerry. Kerry, welcome again. And again, Kerry, you're actually the president of KAV, and which is part of the Dodecanese. So if you can tell us a little bit about the KAV and how they fit into the Dodecanese, which we are part of as well, that'd be wonderful.
Well, the KAV Club is, of course, representing people from the island of KAV. And I've been to Kastellorizian, and I think it's a fabulous island. The airport's a bit tricky, but we were there for St. Helens, Costandino and Eleni, and I can tell you we had a fun time in Kastellorizian. KAV is a little bit bigger than Kastellorizian, and it's more diverse. It does have the beach, and it does have the hills, and it's got a very lively nightlife if you want a nightlife, or it's got a quiet life. So it's a little bit more diversified. And we love KAV, and my children love KAV. And my children are now in their 40s, so excuse the language of calling them kids. But as a consequence of our love of KAV, there was a need for a president or a person to help with the running of the club, and I joined from that perspective. I thought I had skills that the KAV Club needed at the time, and hence I'm now the president, which is great. We haven't been able to do much with lockdowns and everything else, so we renovated the club. We fixed some things that needed fixing. So that's KAV. And I welcome you all to come to KAV next year, August 22.
That's wonderful.
We're going to do a reunion.
Oh, wonderful.
In KAV, so come. Now, the Dodecanese is really a link between all the islands along the Turkish coast. Kastellorizian, Rodon, Ko, Kalimno, Lero, and we can go further up, but they're the main islands that are represented at the moment in the Dodecanese. And the reason for that was really an acknowledgement that each club on its own didn't have the representative power that the joining of the relevant islands could have. If they joined their muscle power, they would get a lot more support from Greece. So that was 30 years ago when Greece was actually dishing out money. It was just an affiliation. There was no formal body. But about 15 years ago, I think, and George Virginis can actually correct me, but about 10, 15 years ago, I can't remember exactly, it was formalised. So we actually became an association, and we have rules and a governing structure. And the presidency of the Cadiz is rotated between the member islands every 2 years. This year it's Kalimnord's turn, and for 2 years, and then it'll be KAV. So it's alphabetical rotation.
Okay.
It's still important because Greece doesn't really recognise each of our little islands, but it does recognise the Canese Federation. So with the celebration of the 200 years, it was addressing a lot of correspondence to the Canese, and the clubs themselves were then splitting that information between them.
Oh, that's wonderful, Kerry. Now, the other thing, I know we talked about this earlier in the week, but I think it's important that we cover it tonight, in that I want to ask, when you decided to become a financial planner and study financial planning, I want you to talk about being a female and getting into that field. I know you're smiling, and really working in a realm that was male dominated, and really, and especially financial services, which is predominantly that way now, although we're trying to change it. So if you could just tell us a little bit about how a little bit about your career journey before I get on to the questions that I've got for you relating to taxation, etc.
Well, you know, things happen in life, don't you? So I actually I got a degree in economics and a dip ed, and I was doing my teacher education, the training, actually going out to schools to do some teaching, and I discovered that I didn't really want to babysit children, teenage children. I thought they were feral, and I had 2 of my own, so I didn't want any more, thank you. So I looked for, you know, as soon as I qualified, got my degrees, I was in community education.
Okay.
That gave me a taste for finance. So I got myself a full-time job as a training officer in a building society many years ago. And I was given wonderful opportunities with that building society. I have very fond memories, and I was given the ability to grow in a big way. So I was actually the company secretary of that building society when it actually became a bank, which Westpac subsequently took over. At home, I had 3 brothers. So I grew up in a male-dominated society, you can say. I always knew I was the girl, the female in the family, because I had to do help mum with the washing and the cleaning and the cooking and all that sort of stuff. But no one ever told me I couldn't do what the boys were doing, apart from riding a bike. I wasn't allowed to ride a bike. But whatever the boys were doing, I wanted to be doing too. So I grew up in an environment where I didn't differentiate what, you know, males could do and what females could do. I was never told I couldn't do what a male could do.
Well,
and
that's a big thing, yes.
It's a big thing, because then when I started my career, I didn't inhibit myself from trying to do things that weren't traditionally female, like go into the finance industry. And, you know, I've got many photos that show 50 people in a photo and I'm the only female. So it didn't really, I didn't even focus on it. I was just looking to do my job properly, and I like, if I do something, to do it properly. So, you know, I entered the bank, and the bank gave me the opportunity to be a company secretary. They then gave me the opportunity to be the, you know, the state-based insurance manager. I did really well. Another company saw me. They said, come over to us, blah, blah, blah. So I did investing, I did insurance, I did, you know, funds management. So I had a very, and we loved investing in property ourselves. So I had a very broad background, and superannuation came onto the scene, which was all about putting your dollars away, little bits like I used to do, you know, put $1 a day, a week, and it would accumulate over time. And that's what superannuation was supposed to do.
Terrific. So what we'll do now, Kerry, is actually move on to what you do, I suppose, all day, every day, give advice, etc. So when you're buying a property, say, to fund part of your retirement, what are the things, bearing in mind what the guys have just said, buying in the right area, getting into the market, what are the other things that longer term, say someone that's entering the market needs to think about for that particular property to be viable in their retirement?
It's what stage of life are they at? Are they buying a property?
Well, let's say they're entering the market, or they're midstream and preparing for retirement.
Okay. Well, whenever you mention the word retirement, you have to think superannuation. And why do you think super? Because it's a very tax effective platform. The dollars that you put into super, the earnings on the dollars you put into super are only taxed at 15%. Most of our marginal tax rates are over 30. So it's a very tax effective vehicle. And that's how you should see it. You shouldn't see it as, oh, super is for my old age. You should see it as a vehicle that will limit the tax you pay on anything you earn, including capital gains tax, at 15% or lower.
Okay, so you're saying, Kerry, that if you're buying a property for an investment purposes, you should look at it as, say, an SMS structure for that?
There's a few things you need to look at before you actually come to that conclusion.
Could
So
you explain that for people that perhaps don't know?
superannuation should be at the back of your mind if you're looking for property for retirement. But the other factors that come into it are, do I have the money to pay for it outright, or do I need to borrow? If I need to borrow, where would I get my maximum buck? Would I have it outside as an individual, in a company set up, in superannuation, or in a trust? So you have to go through the planning. Just like you plan to buy a particular property in a particular area at a particular price, you need to look at, where will this property be housed? And to give you an example, I still have a client. She's a very close friend and a good client. She had money in her super, a lot of money in her super, because she was a high income earner. So she was earning 300 plus a year, and she was maximizing her super. So she had money in her super. She had most of that money in a diversified portfolio, but it was mainly on the stock market. And because diversification is a very important thing, you can't have all your eggs in one basket. The recommendation was that she should diversify by looking at property as well. My license doesn't allow me to select the property, just the structure. So Helen actually got an opportunity, and it was a huge opportunity, to participate in a property funding arrangement where 20, I think it was 15, don't hold me to it, could have been 15 people actually put dollars in, and they bought a property in Salmon Street, South Melbourne. Now, Helen's share of that was 650,000 she put in. And, that was in 2014. It was in super. She was 58, so she would have been over 60 if she wanted to sell that property. And that's the other thing. You don't buy property for the short term. You buy property for the long term. And anyone who holds property for less than 5 years is mad, because they'll never, they'll have to have a unique opportunity to make money. You should hold property for 10 years or more is my founding principle. So anyway, Helen had put 650 into the property. She was age 58. There was ample planning opportunities for her to be in pension phase when she sold that property, if she sold that property. The difference between superannuation accumulation, where you're accumulating your dollars, and pension, superannuation pension, is that 15% earnings tax drops to zero. So the fact she could go to a pension in 5 or 10 years' time or longer, where if she decided to sell that property, meant that the capital gains tax would have been at 0%. So that was the strategy originally, and that was why she put this dollar into property. But the homework had been done. It was in a city. It was an opportunity for a zoning, a rezoning of the area, because a lot of residential property was being rezoned at the time. So she had done her homework. It was the right property, and we believe at the right time. And then 5 years later, so 14, it was 17 actually, so it's only three years later, the property got an offer to be bought out, and the profit was going to be huge. So from 650, Helen was going to get just under 2 mil. So there was a substantial profit, like 1.4 or 1.35, if you want to be exact, in profit. So the bottom line is Helen was able to get most of that money tax-free.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Because she was actually in pension phase, before they changed the rules. So they've changed the rules now. So you have to be over 65 to actually put that strategy in place again. But the bottom line is Helen reaped a profit of, as I said, 1.35, and the tax that she actually paid on that was 8,000.
Okay, so essentially when you're looking at putting property into your portfolio for retirement, the idea really is to keep that property for as long as you can and really structure it within that portfolio that you have really well and get the right advice, correct?
Well, yes, it's think about the strategy of the buying, strategy of the selling, and in between you're reaping the rentals. So you're actually getting, you know, what you get on a fixed term.
So what, without mentioning names, what perhaps are the common mistakes people make?
They don't do their planning. That's the most common mistake. They don't research their area properly. You know, they buy the wrong property in the wrong area at the wrong time. And, you know, 2 years later, they've sold it. Well, obviously, they're going to make a loss, not going to make any money on that. So the research is very important. The planning is very important. And then the structure that you use. If it's your first home, it'd probably be in your own name. It's, you know, you may rent it out, so it's negatively geared. But if you're planning to be in retirement, late 40s onwards, superannuation should figure in your strategy.
Kerry, thank you very much for those really valuable tips. And I'm sure people will have a lot of questions for you at the end of this. But now I'm going to hand over to Stasi. Now, Stasi is a Kazzie member, but also he is a director of Manningham Woodards. Welcome, Stasi.
How are we?
Good, good, good. So
Good,
we've heard all this information. So from your point of view, and I've got a good question for you, is what do people need to consider when they're selecting a real estate agent to either represent them to sell a property or to buy a property?
I think, you know, from the outside looking in, all real estate agents probably look the same. And that's probably something our industry's been kind of tarnished with, that, you know, everyone looks like, oh, well, he's a real estate agent, oh, I'll get him to sell my house. But each agent does something different. And I think what you want to do is select or interview at least 2 to 3 agents before selecting your own. And what I would definitely recommend is that you do a bit of homework before you call those agents in. Don't necessarily think, oh, I'm going to call this agency and that agency just because they sell the most property. Actually hone in and look at the individual that you're going to be employing to sell your home, because that's going to be very important. Things to not look for are very high volume agents. Their agents, you'll find, will be having 20, 30 listings at any point in time. Generally, if you're going to interview those agents and then you're going to probably most likely employ them, if you look at their time schedule, they won't be able to devote a lot of their time to you. So who are you actually getting that's going to sell your property? Because a lot of those big teams and high volume agents most likely will have assistants and PAs that work under them. So essentially, the people doing the work experience are the ones doing the work experience on your biggest asset. So I'd say that's probably one of the biggest things you'd want to step away from. So definitely I'd look at choosing a real estate agent that's local in your area, has local knowledge, but also not too high of a turnover agent in terms of, you know, 15, 20 listings. I'd always look for an agent that has no more than 10 to 12 listings on the market. So it shows they're active, they understand the market, they know the market, but they're not overworked where they're not going to devote as much time as they can to your property.
Stasi, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm throwing a question at you now, but isn't there an aggregator site where, you know, there's a lot of real estate agents from different companies that have got ratings? Am I correct in saying that? And what do you think of them?
Yeah, look, they're good, but you've also got to remember that us as agents pay those websites to have our ratings on there. So as well as, yeah, it's good to have a look at the agent's ratings. You know, you've got to look at it this is your biggest asset, and you're going to give the keys to someone and trust them to sell your property. So if you're going to do that, I wouldn't just be quickly doing a quick search online in 5 minutes and then go, okay, well, that's it, you know. That's the agent I'm going to use. I'd actually go out and maybe go to a few open for inspections or go to a few appointments and see how the agent conducts themselves. Are the agents at the property or is someone else at the property? Because it's one thing to be a good talker and be a good lister, like a lot of agents, but then if they don't follow that through, then that's kind of how some misunderstandings can happen between real estate agents and your clients.
Well, getting to that, there was on Current Affair that issue where the real estate agent and the vendor had a misunderstanding. But from your point of view, what are the most common misunderstandings that, and because you see a lot of properties where they're with one particular firm for 1 month and then they switch somewhere else, so something's gone wrong. So what are the things or the common misunderstandings that when you're going out there looking for that real estate agent to represent you, that that you can ask them particular questions to cover off?
I think it's definitely a price question. Price is probably the I guess the solution to a lot of the problems in real estate. If you were to put a home up for $1 and put a sign out the front, anyone could sell it, it's fair to say, because it would represent good value. So if I put a price tag on a property that was $1 million and the market value realistically thought it was only $850 to $900, it's going to be a struggle to sell that home. And of course, every home has their challenges. That might be that it's a main road, it might be behind the train station, or it might be next to the freeway, or whatever it might be. But every home will sell at a price. So the biggest misunderstanding that I see, there we go. One of the biggest misunderstandings of it I see is definitely around price. Agents not being able to deliver where they think the property would sit in the market, and honestly, and probably giving hard facts. So if an agent does price your property, ask them how they're pricing your property, and you want to make sure that they're using comparable properties. So they're properties that are like your home. You can never have an exact replica of your home, but you want something that's got the same beds, bath and car and land size as your property. And that's what we call a comparable property. Okay.
Now, I know that Nik touched on this in buying within a circle within the CBD, but you might be midstream and starting your portfolio of property. What would you consider? I mean, there's a flood of apartments out there, and I think that that's going to grow. Actually, you're going to have vacant space in the city, so nobody's got a crystal ball with this, of course. But what would be your advice on someone going out there looking for that investment property to buy now?
Definitely, if you're looking at an investment, you do have to look at the return and see where that sits. And I think that works in well with even, previously what we were just talking about, and actually sitting down and planning, okay, well, what's this property going to cost me to run? If you're looking at buying things like apartments, you need to factor in owner's corporation. And then you've got things like land tax and so forth to factor in. So don't just look at the overall, okay, this looks like a good investment. You need to look at what the returns are. And I would try and probably recommend to stay away from some of the bigger complexes if it's an apartment that you're looking at. Some of the body corporates are heading into the $8,000 to $10,000 marks once the builder's warranty finishes. So be mindful of that, because if you're starting to have an investment property in there and $8,000 to $10,000 of the rent per year is going to running the building for your allotment of your apartment, then you're going to start to see that your return is actually going to get a lot of that, I guess, eaten up. So I would definitely recommend having a look and staying with something into a smaller complex, especially if it's for investment. But the one thing you're never going to get any more of in this world is land, and land is the thing that considers to continue to grow in value. If you have a look at every property, what it sells for today compared to say 5 years ago, or if you use the theory of 10 years ago, if anything's going double the price, it's all because of the price of land. So even if it's maybe you have to go out a little bit further to get something, I would still recommend that in a long-term asset or long-term growth or investment, I'd always look for a property with some land.
Okay, what about those new growth corridors that are opening up towards past Werribee, etc.? What do you think of, you've got a commute now, as Justin mentioned, you've got a commute, and especially now coming out of lockdown, the working from home is going to be a choice that people can make. What do you think of those corridors as well? Because as I mentioned before, not everybody can buy within that 20-kilometre radius.
Absolutely. And look, they're really good estates. And when you buy in there, I think your mentality should be, okay, well, I'm buying into an estate and not buying into, say, an established residential street. So be prepared that that investment is going to maybe take a good 5 to 7 years before you see some strong growth in that. But it doesn't matter if you look at areas like Doreen and so forth, which, essentially were a house and land package area at $400,000 and now have houses selling there at $750,000 comfortably. So the growth can be there. It's just more of a long-term hold, opposed to, say, an established area, which we know will continue to grow very quick.
Okay, so this is a really important question. I want you to explain what the difference is between passing in a property and buying a property. And if it's passed in, how long is that window of opportunity opened?
Yeah, I did this for 2 clients on the weekend. And obviously they maybe were thinking, oh, we'll just let the property pass in. And I was encouraging them to get the property passed into us. So when a property passes in on a vendor bid, essentially what that does is you do have an occurrence where if there is a bit of interest in the property, it becomes an auction after the auction. So the auction happens, there's no bidding, the agent passes the property in on a vendor bid. So essentially what that does is that allows the whole market to put an offer to the owner. If you put your hand up and you allow the property to get passed into yourself and it passes into you and not on a vendor bid, you're having the first right of refusal from the market to what the vendor's reserve is, which is a very important position to be in. And normally 8 times out of 10, you will secure the property because you're the one dealing with the vendor one-on-one. So if you go into an auction and it doesn't look like there's much happening there, what you want to be trying to do is get the property passed into yourself, so you've got the first right to negotiate with that vendor. So I did 2 on the weekend, both of them passed into me, we secured the sale, and we got both of them for my clients at really good prices and significantly under what they were prepared to pay because there just wasn't enough action at the auction.
Thanks, Stasi. Now, I know we had a little bit of a chat before we opened up the event, and you mentioned that it's really quite incredible at the moment that a lot of property, nobody would have predicted this 5 years ago that people would buy properties unseen and on the internet. So what are you experiencing? I mean, it's quite phenomenal.
It is. When Nik was talking, I just got a text message from a client saying, yeah, let's move ahead and purchase this property. And I was able to send back a quick email and it automatically populates the contract. And he's now signed the contract. I can see an email pop up while I've been in this Zoom conference. So within the space of 20 minutes, half an hour, I've signed up an offer on a property when you don't really have to be present anymore. And that's probably the scariest thing that I'm seeing in real estate. I've been in it for 14 years and within 14 years, I've seen, pen and paper and everything very time consuming to now we're selling properties. A lot of them are unseen, which is obviously for the times that we're in, but everything is electronic now, all our contracts, all our agreements with clients. So business is happening faster than ever. So it's a little bit scary, but once you come to terms with it, this is really where the world's going, and what's happened in the last 2 years is probably fast track our industry for another 5 to 7 years. So it's pretty crazy to think that we're selling property and really our human contact unfortunately isn't as strong as what it was, but our time management is a lot better. So it's a bit of a unique world we're living in.
So what's the percentage of people that are actually buying sight unseen?
I'd be selling at least 65-70%. Currently with people that haven't seen homes. So more than half the properties we sell, they're like only now we're allowed to start doing one-on-one inspections. So now I found the last 3-4 days it's started to slow down, especially with the announcements. I think some people are getting back, oh gee, we're going back to work or our life's probably going to change as of next week. So I'd be interested to see how that happens. But prior to that, in the lockdown, every property sold sight unseen. So we sold 28 properties, I think, unseen, which is and they were all different price ranges from $700,000-800,000 all the way to $2.5 million. So it's been a pretty crazy, few months.
Well,
and Nick touched on it before that he's never seen a market like it. And, my family's been in real estate with my dad as well, in excess of 40 years. We've never seen it because we haven't lived through a pandemic, I guess, but it's pretty crazy.
It's a very good point you've made because really with COVID, it's pushed from the research I've done, it's actually pushed people from all ages into that technical arena, probably 5, as you said, 5 to 7 years ahead of where we would have been if we hadn't. So that although the pandemic has been horrific, I think that there is certain things that has been good in terms of pushing us to use technology, and simply that we're doing this Kazzie Connect to keep everybody connected. If you had have said we were doing this 5 years ago, we would have said no way, but here we are and connecting. So,
Well, like think about it like this. You know, I've had a chance to see everyone twice now, and realistically, to run an event and see everyone, it would have been really hard to get everyone together. So, you know, we've been able to do 2 events via Zoom. Not saying that this is, of course, we can't wait for one-on-one interaction again, but it's just allowed us to pivot into a different direction.
The one question I want to ask is when a property is, you've got 2 interested parties and they're communicating via email, etc. I mean, how does that work? Do you look at the time or see when the bid was put in, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, we run an online online auction system, which essentially people are bidding, and we're essentially doing the auction to the camera. And obviously we have our laptop set up and everything. And then one person sits there and they put the bids in. And as people are typing their bids in, it comes up to one universal device, and then it comes up on the auctioneer's screen. So it's a bit complex, but we're able to see which bids are actually coming in, what comes in first, and we can actually identify, oh, this is the bidder with us, and we conduct the auction just as a normal auction. But it's pretty crazy technology to think that we're here now opposed to where we were, you know, 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Look, what you've passed on to our community out there tonight's been really, really valuable. I'm sure they're taking a lot away, but of course they want any further information, they can contact yourself, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm available for contact anytime.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. Now I'm going to Justin. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Lucky last.
Yeah, well, no, well, I won't say I've saved the best till last, but here you go. Now, Justin is actually our Vice President of the KAV, but not only that, he's a Managing Director of the Rees Group. Now, Justin's going to talk to us tonight about his perspective. So when a person is looking to, this is from a business perspective now, so when a person's actually looking to expand their business and commercial portfolios, Justin, what are the things they should be looking for?
Yeah, okay. What I might do just before I answer that question is I'll go back to a couple of things that were just said. So to Nik's point, just to highlight approvals for finance, and Kerry talked about planning, which I'll talk about in a moment, but approvals take time. Especially if you're buying your first home. If someone hasn't been through it in the last 2 years, basically every single line item on your bank statement, there's people who check, and there's computers who check where you're spending your money to make sure you can afford your first home. So I think to Nik's point, take the time and get your approval, not just a pre-approval done for your loan, so that you know, because it can take months and months, like 2 to 3 months to get an approval through with banks, and banks are a bit slow at the moment as well. First clarifying point. The second clarifying point, Nik also mentioned, I think, about interest rates. And I think we spoke about this last Kazzie Connect, the first part of the property was, you know, since then, New Zealand's, I think, creeped into interest rate or made some noises about it. They will move. And I'm locking in all my investment and personal loans because then I used to have this saying years ago, lock in your interest rates and you can sleep at night. I mean, at the moment, you can lock in interest rates with a 2 in front of them. I mean, most of us remember back to 7-8%, and we thought that was cheap, you know. So just get some perspective about that and how that sort of works, I think, in your personal situation. So back to if you have a business and expanding your business, and sort of some of the tricks and things to look for when you're looking to buy a property. I think, again, to Kerry's point, planning properly and getting the advice around the structure. Which structure are you going to be holding this asset in? If you run a business in a company, should you be buying the asset that you're looking for in a family trust? Could it potentially be bought with someone else? Should it be bought in your superannuation fund? And again, you've got to take the advice on that. So there's a whole myriad of questions you've got to ask yourself about what's the best way of buying this particular asset. Now, for the last 40 or 50 years, long before I was an accountant, one of the best ways for people to create wealth is to have a business premises that's owned outside of the business and leased back to your business, and then you can pay at the top end of the market rate to pay off that loan quickly. You know, in some cases, a lot more quickly than having an arm's length tenant. So, again, getting the right advice on how to structure that's really important. And also too, I don't know what Kerry thinks, but I think this window for self-managed super funds to borrow money, I mean, I'm not up to date with superannuation legislation as much, but I just see the number of banks and lenders that have been able to lend to super funds. Where it was 10 years ago, there's now only 3 or 4, and there was 33 or 4 lending to super funds. So I think this window of borrowing in your super fund is closing. So, you know, if there is an opportunity potentially, if you have the money, like Kerry was saying beforehand, you know, you've got to take some very conservative approaches to the way that you borrow in your super fund, but there's not many lenders left to do that. Would you agree, Kerry, on that point?
Totally agree. And in fact, I wouldn't bother borrowing in a super fund because you've got a tax rate of 15%. So why borrow? If you didn't have enough money, then you're buying it jointly. You, the individual, or you, the company, buying jointly with the super fund is an option.
Yeah. And again, getting that structure right, and it's once it's all set up, it's all pretty easy. But it's getting it set up properly later in the first place is very important.
Okay. So, from your perspective, what have been some of, I will say, the horror stories that you've had to deal with, where people haven't done that planning, they haven't locked in interest rates, they're, you know, running it by the seat of their pants. So, possibly learning by mistakes. This is what I'm looking for.
Yeah. If people are out there and they've not bought a property before, property's a funny one, and Stasi will agree with me. It's got to feel right. If you walk into somewhere and you think, I just want to buy it, and Nik will agree with me here, you know, if Nik's buying his next site to renovate, sometimes you walk into a place, and I'm not talking about the place feels haunted, it just doesn't feel like the layout of the house is right, or the street's not quite right, or where it is in the street, or the way it faces, you know, those sorts of things. So firstly, it's got to feel right. And then that point that Nik was making before, this FOMO, fear of missing out, where we're at the moment, we all know that where it will be in a couple of years' time is different to where we are now. Where that is, nobody knows. Now, it might flatten off a little bit. It's probably not going to go crashing down. This is the property market in general. So again, just don't rush. Rushing deals and flying by the seat of your pants, as you said before, is when people make mistakes. And I think as we get a little bit older, you sort of learn to slow down a little bit, especially when you're doing transactions and deals, and sleeping on things overnight often helps as well. Over leveraged. So Kerry made a good point about borrowing in super funds. Some people, for some reason, are really insistent because they think they want to leverage up their super fund, but in most cases, because of interest rates and yields and the tax rate, it's just not worth it. But over leveraging outside of super. So you're buying your first or your second home, and you want to borrow 90%. If you want to borrow 90% of an asset, you may not be able to afford it, and you should probably look at either a different asset potentially, or maybe even just saving up a little bit more money, or borrowing some money from some family. Us Greeks like doing that. You know, to get the extra 10%. So you're borrowing 80%. You're just a little bit more comfortable rather than over leveraging. Because the worst thing is over leveraging, not locking in your interest rates, and even though the bank assesses your affordability on a much higher rate, I think it's around 5% from memory, you just don't want to be over leveraged. So I think that's a really big one, and I think a lot of people have been caught out with that before, Lena.
I just want to throw something in here, Justin, but one other thing that I'd like to cover off tonight is that a lot of people don't consider their credit rating. And when, you know, they've got their credit cards up to the billy-o and they haven't paid their payments on time or whatever, does that affect your ability to buy a property, and how long would that last?
Yeah, so the current lending rules, and I don't know the exact fact, but I know that every $1,000 of credit card limit, so you could have a $10,000 limit, it's almost 10 times the borrowing capacity. So a $10,000 credit card limit means that you can potentially reduce your borrowing capacity by approximately, don't quote me exactly, like $100,000. So one of the things, coming back to what everyone's been saying about planning and getting the right advice is looking at, well, do I really need that credit card limit, getting your limits down, and also to your payment history, even on things like gas bills and phone bills are in your own name. If you're not paying them on time, all those sorts of things, getting resources, not just saving a deposit, it's getting your credit score and your credit history. And you can do a credit check online and do a credit score online that doesn't affect your credit rating, because that's what the banks do when they look at lending, especially to individuals. Business lending is different. They look at a whole lot of other bits and pieces, but very good point, Lena, and you can jump online and check that.
I think it's a valuable point, because when you're doing those pre-approvals, people forget, and we've all been guilty of paying the odd bill not on time, but if you're continually doing that, I know that does affect your credit rating. So that's really, really good to have mentioned that. But now, in lastly, I mean, no, as I said before, nobody's got a crystal ball, but what's going to happen to the CBD? Sally Capp, she's trying her best to open up and get people back in there. What's your view on that, and what do you think is going to happen with the CBD area and getting people back there?
Yeah, I think everyone has their own opinion. Everyone listening tonight will have their own opinion. It's going to, people are resilient and markets are resilient, but it's going to take a lot of time, I think. I mean, personally, a lot of what we've talked about relates to, we're talking about the right suburb, but I personally think sort of city fringe is probably a better, if you're looking to invest, and there's some markets that are still running quite hot, near our office, for example, in Richmond, they're still running really hot. But the city, I mean, most of us can't afford to go and buy a building outright in the city. But then again, do you really need to buy yourself a strata office in the city as opposed to buying a strata office in, I'm just using as an example, South Yarra or somewhere like that? So having a look at other options and alternatives is really important. I think the city will take time. I think, as I said, we're resilient. Hospitality, people are resilient too. They'll come back and they'll make it attractive. But I think it's going to be a good 5 years before it really gets humming again. That's just a personal opinion. I know Sally's trying. Remember they had that incentive when they opened us back up again at the start of the year. If you went to the city and you got your bill, they actually then encouraged you actually could put it online and get, I think you got $25 back or a percentage of the bill back or something like that. So they'll do things like that, but it's just going to take a lot of time, and it will affect, like if you own, and we talked about this last time, you own a city or city fringe property that perhaps is not in the right area, or it was leased to hospitality, it's going to take some time to release that, and you maybe need to look at different uses for the property as well. Yeah,
it's a bit sad what's happening in the CBD at the moment, but yeah, I agree with you, Justin. People have got short memories, and it'll just take a little bit of time for it to revive again. Well, we've come to the end of our speakers speaking, so now I'm going to unmute everybody, and certainly if you've got questions, now's your opportunity. You'd pay hundreds of dollars to actually see these guys if you had to make an appointment. So ask away, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer any questions you've got.
I think one of the most important things I've heard tonight is from Justin. From my experience regarding investments or buying a home, it's the word leverage. A lot of people get into trouble. The way I operated, and my rule of thumb was, if I was going to buy something, I always put a 30 to 35% equity in anything I bought. And the reason being that, of course, I went through the credit squeeze in 1962. So I've had a bit of experience what happens when the interest rates go up. And I believe that 35% gives you the leverage or your insurance of not getting sold up. So leverage has got a lot to do, very important, especially when young people are buying their first property. And also for investment properties, you've got to allow yourself around about 20% off for all expenses, including body corporates, land taxes and all commissions and things like that. So what I'm saying, it's very important is the leverage, and that gets back to planning. Planning's most important, but then again, planning is like an umbrella. There's a lot of things coming under that auspices. So leverage to me is very, very important. Well said, Justin, too, by the way.
Thanks, Michael.
Another thing too, Justin, I totally agree with what you said about walking into a property and having that gut feeling. I think that's something I've mentioned the last two meetings that we've had. It is very important to walk in and feel that that's the right place for you to buy. It's very, very well said. I totally forgotten to say that.
It's hard to explain, but sometimes you walk in, you go to an open for inspection, and you know, a few people have done, and you just walk in, you go, no, it's just something doesn't like you walk into another one in the same street. This is the one. This feels right for some reason.
You get
just
the gut
feel.
Yeah. So, Kerry, I just want to ask you a little question as well.
Sure.
When you say to hold a property for 10 years, well, that's a lot to do with your age group. Now, if you've got super and you're 70 years of age, you might not last 10 years.
Well, you know, someone's going to inherit it, aren't they? And if you're in pension phase, they'll inherit it for very little tax.
So
there is a tax on super, whether you like it or not.
I know, but in that case, the profit's in the buying if you want to turn it over. I think waiting, I wouldn't want to wait 10 years. I like to get a profit straight away at my age.
The difference is you actually improve a property and on sell. The 10-year rule is for people who just simply hold the property without actually doing anything to it.
Yes.
For you, property is your business. So you buy it, you fix it up, you sell it, and you make money that way. If that's what they're doing, fantastic. Sell it within the 2 years.
And it's hard to borrow though in the super fund. You can't borrow to buy property in the super fund.
No, you can't.
So you can take it out, but you can't put it back in again after a certain time.
Well, it depends on the property. If it's commercial property, you may be able to. But, you know, the key word is retirement.
Yes.
So if you're thinking retirement, you should be thinking property may be suitable in superannuation. And if you've got commercial, you know, we talked about commercial property, you're operating your business in it, you lease it to yourself, it's very tax effective. But eventually you can put that property into superannuation. And then, you know, it's unsold with very little capital gains tax. It's looking at where are you, what are the opportunities, what are the options, and what are possible outcomes. So that's the planning process. And, you know, sometimes we don't make use of something because we don't know enough about it. That's where you need to put, you know, get someone who does to actually explain it to you. And, you know, if you see the benefit, you do it. If you don't see the benefit, you don't.
It's very important to get that.
Actually,
can you see that changing? Sorry.
Which part?
I was just going to ask, can you see that changing around being able to borrow in super? Because you used to be able to do it.
No.
One property I went to buy and we ended up having a headache.
Guys, don't do it.
No, don't do it. You've got to have another thing. Set up another company and it's just like a dog's breakfast.
And the banks aren't lending anymore, so you won't be able to do it anyway.
No.
I've got a question from Maxim Zervis, and thank you for joining, Maxim. And this is to Stasi or Justin. Do you have an opinion on the Victorian Home Buyer Fund shared equity scheme, particularly for first home buyers?
Justin, you want to take that, or you want me to run with that?
I'll start. So we did an article for our clients on our online tax business recently about this, and I think it's the Victorian government's offering essentially a top up for deposits for first home buyers. So I don't know the full ins and outs of it, but on the face of it, in the article that we did, it seems like a good idea. I think it's got to be a new home from memory, and they're obviously wanting to encourage construction in the state. But Stasi, how about yourself?
Yeah, well, it's a 5% deposit minimum, which is obviously enticing to younger people, because if you have a look at your average sale price, I think it's probably going to sit around at least 450 to 500,000. So, you know, it realistically means they only have to come up with half of the 10% to do that. So I guess it's all about personal preference. I think Michael Spartels brought up a great point that he would always put 35% into a property. So, you know, if you're going to be putting 5% into a property and the government's going to own 25% of the property, it leaves you with a 70% borrowing. And I just don't know how, personally, I don't see how it can work in the future. I think it's probably just trying to give a lifeline to a lot of young home buyers that are, you know, in their 20s or in their late teens, trying to get into their first property, and maybe don't have the support that, you know, some of us have been very fortunate to maybe have some family or parents to help out. But long term, essentially, you're giving, you know, what is it, 25% of your property to the government to own. So I just don't know how that's going to work long term. No one's seen it happen before.
Especially if the interest rates go up, this 90% to 100% borrowings, and a lot of young people are doing it. And to me, I think, you know, they say about 3 or 4 years interest rates will go up. I'm in the belief that I think in the next 6 months you're going to see something. It's starting now, even yesterday in the Westpac. You know, these little things like that, and the psychology comes into it. So I'd be very, very careful if I'm borrowing 90 or 100%. In fact, I wouldn't do it at the best of times. Maybe I'm a little bit old-fashioned.
I think the young, sorry to jump in. I think if you're a parent and you're trying to give advice to kids, there's a lot more, I guess, effective ways that you can assist your child without giving them money or monetary. And I don't know how people feel about it, but there's things as like going guarantor and helping your child out on that sense, where essentially you're seconding that they'll be able to pay the loan. And if they're living under your roof and it's an investment or it's their first home and they're trying to get themselves into the property market, essentially, of course, you're putting your name down to say, you know, my child's going to pay the loan, and if not, I'll take a responsibility. But then if it goes back to what Kerry was saying, and you got planning, well, if the rental return sits there and we know that it's going to pay itself, well, and it's a good investment, then it could work. And that's probably a really good way to help your child, instead of maybe giving them, you know, a 25% option for the government to own their home instead of maybe a parent to assist.
Well, the parents have to be careful, because if anything happens and something happens and the marriage splits up or something like that, the parents at that age mightn't have any money left after the giving the guarantee. So you've got to know your limitations too in this business, as you probably will, boys. That you don't believe in your, well, I'm not going to say it, bulls. You've got to know, you've got to be logical what you're doing and be realistic. And as I said, you've got to know your limitations. And it all gets back to the lowest common denominator, what Kerry said, is that you've got to do your planning. And planning, you've got to do your homework even before you buy something. You've got to go to auctions, get the feel of places, get to know the valuations, even know how to bid at auctions. And then you say, all right, I can do this, I'll do that. And you put on pencil and paper, and then off you go. But you've got to know your limitations.
Exactly. And I just want to pop in there too and say there's an alternative to being guarantor or giving your children money, especially if you don't know yet whether they're responsible. You have to be a little bit careful.
Yes.
One of the options there is you can always buy with your child, buy a property with your child. So when you're buying the property, the child could own part of it and the parent could own part of it. And then as the child shows responsibility and is able to look after it, they can have it all. Because, you know, there are certain stages that you can go through where you can gift that property to your child if you want to. But, you know, we parents need to also look after ourselves in old age, because we don't want to be a burden on our children. And if we give our money away, because every parent wants to help their children, but you can also help them by not making them responsible for your finances in old age. So I would caution parents, help other ways where you still maintain an interest.
Yes.
Kerry, can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Death duties. We spoke about death duties the last Kazzie Connect, and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay.
Death duties.
Death duties. Well, they do exist, and I'll talk about superannuation death duties because that's the one I know best. As you put your dollars into super, you pay a 15% contribution tax. When you die, the government wants that 15% contribution paid by whoever inherits the dollars if the label on those dollars is taxable. So when you're looking at your super fund, you look at the components within the super fund, and there's two major ones. One is tax-free and one is taxable. And there's a strategy that you can put in place to change the label from taxable to tax-free to your estate. It needs time to implement, but it can be done so that, you know, $1 million can be converted to tax-free dollars so that your children don't pay any taxes when they inherit that asset, whether it's shares, dollars, you know, it's shares or property, it doesn't matter which it is, whatever's got a taxable component on it, you can overcome that using a strategy. But it needs time to implement, because you can't put a lot of money into super like you used to be able to. You have to do it over time. Hope that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't.
But if you got money in the super fund and you can't put any more in there at a certain age,
Yes.
what happens to that super fund when you die? Then the government will still be taking the 15% out of it.
No. You take it out the day before you die.
Oh,
and have it out of super.
I better put a ring on my finger just to remind me when I'm going to die. Only the good die young, so I've got a long way to go yet.
There is a problem. Once, you know, obviously when you've reached 70 plus, there's limits on what you can put into super.
Yeah.
You can downsize your property, for example, and put more dollars in, the 300,000 per person. But, you know, there's very little. So, you know, one of the strategies, if you get warning that you become seriously ill, for example, and you get a warning, then you can plan your affairs appropriately. The other thing you can do, of course, is you can set up, I think, Justin, you mentioned this last time, the testamentary trust option. So there are things you can do, but, you know, you need the time, you need to be in the right position, and you need to be able to plan the strategy so you minimise.
Is that 100% safe? Only 95%, I was told.
Which bit? Which bit?
At the testamentary, the trust you just mentioned.
I know
there's nothing safe. So you balance up the risk and the benefit, and you make a decision.
As long as I know when I'm going to die, I'm right.
Well, the only problem is you may not. So.
Actually, I've got a question, Justin. I want to throw this one at you. We're up for an election next year, and I'm not talking about the AGM. We've got to have the Kazzies, but we're up for a federal election. So how do you think that's going to, I mean, do you think that's going to affect the property market going forward, that people are going to be more hesitant in buying? Will that slow the market down, do you think?
I'll only comment, people probably don't remember when we had the Victorian election about 3 years ago. Things dipped and went a bit quiet beforehand. So I think there's often inactivity that happens before an election because people are trying to wait to see what happens. Because the problem we've got federally is you're going to have Labor coming out talking about stopping negative gearing. And for those that don't know, negative gearing, it's when you're able to, you spend more on the property with the interest and cost than you get in rent, and that comes off your taxable income. So there's always a lot of change, and people are always very hesitant. So it'll have some effect, but I'm not sure how much. But a lot of the property, I think the market in the future is going to come back to our immigration levels. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, we're all linked to immigrant families, and we need the immigrants coming in for the properties to still be built and still be going up. So we'll wait and see.
Well, Australia really is looked on very favourably by many other countries. So there's, you know, the talk is starting that if our government allows more immigration, there will be takers. There will be people who are interested in coming here, and they may be, you know, from Hong Kong, they may be from London, or Europe. There's lots of people who love our life here in Australia.
I can see you smiling, Stasi, because I know you've got a view. So if you can share that with us in terms of the Asian market.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Look, I definitely think, just from the experiences that I'm having with some of my staff and definitely clientele that we're selling to, I think immigration for the Chinese demographic will be very strong next year. That's the advice. That's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing from them all, almost making fun of us, saying, I can't believe you guys are complaining that you're getting paid to stay home.
Yes, exactly.
I had a Chinese agent call me and say, "Oh, wait till next year. If the economy is not great, don't worry, your economy will be good because the property market will fly." And I said, "Why is that?" And he goes, "There's just a line of everyone from China waiting to come because they've never seen a country pay people $750 a week to stay home so they can stay safe. And in our country, they're throwing us to the wolves and saying, get out and work. And people are dying from COVID left, right and centre." So
there was an article today, which I found very interesting. A certain gentleman in Sydney, New South Wales, who builds and owns a lot of apartments. He told his staff that he expects to double his growth next year, which I think is significant. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, it's Harry Chubikoff, for those that don't know, the developer up in Sydney, builds a lot of apartments. He must know a few things that we don't, but just, I think back to that point, we've lived through the lockdowns here in Australia, especially in Victoria, but I think back to your point, Stasi, a lot of countries look very favourably on Australia, so I think that will be positive. Whether the growth is going to be double, I doubt that.
That was just his, for his business.
His projects, it's pretty high targets, but that's why he's one of the richest men in the country.
Yeah, I can definitely see that if the market was to level out, it would have another re-kick if they opened up the borders and this started to happen, especially if, I think they're trying to talk about interest rate increases like they are doing now. And I think if the economy tightens up next year, which it has every opportunity to, I think that will, not that I'm an economist, Kerry, you studied economics more than what I have, but I think logically it would make sense that they're going to have to open the borders to re-stimulate the economy and get that tax money coming in terms of stamp duty. And that's where...
Yeah, we have to get working. The government, where is the government going to get their dollars from? I mean, the Victorian government is really highly dependent on land tax, but some of the land tax prices that people are paying are ridiculous. So they really need that income, and GST may rise, but I just want to touch on interest rates. Interest rates will rise. There's nothing more definite. They will rise. You can't stay at 0.25 or 1%. They will go up. When? Next year? 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, we don't know. We have to see what else happens, but they will go up, and you should be taking appropriate planning strategies to cover that.
So you can sleep at night.
I totally agree with you with people coming in from overseas, but what's going to happen when all that Asian money comes here again? Prices will inflate again. How are our kids going to be able to buy something?
I think it's a little bit different this time round, in that it's not necessarily the Asian money coming in for its sake, because China's going to put the dampener on that. So I don't know how they're going to. They'll probably find a way, but there's a dampener on the speculative buying of residential property. I think the new buying, in my view, this is a personal view, is it will come from people who actually want to come and live here. They're not just buying up property; they actually want to live in it here.
Kerry, do you agree with the gap now? The rich have got wealthier and the poor have got poorer.
Absolutely.
The last 18 months.
Absolutely.
And I worry about that. I mean, once now people, you go down Chapel Street, you go down Toorak Road, all these shops are full lease. Okay, there were people occupying those shops and having businesses. How are they going to be confident to go back into it and see what's going to happen in the next 12 months? I mean, I just shake my head a little bit, and it's heartbreaking to see. It really is.
Try being in the city.
Yeah.
I wanted to
ghost town. It's just.
We've got a chat here from Isabel.
Yes, that's it, Nik.
Money to kids as a loan to buy a house, and they can't afford to own or pay for the loan. Interest is low now, but will only go up. What we've been saying, he paid 70% interest when he bought his house. Now I remember when my dad paid 70% interest on a house in Caulfield years ago.
I lived through that period. I remember it well as well.
Yeah, so
which is why the 35% that your dad was talking about is so important. It's such a good rule to have. 35%, you know, whether you're investing in property or the share market and you're leveraging the share market investment, 35% is a good input.
You don't buy as much, but at least you can sleep at night better.
Exactly.
And getting back to the Hong Kong people to come in, there's certain restrictions too now that they've put on the government bringing money into Australia. If you sell a property now, you've got to go through certain questions regarding where did you get the money from or to buy it. They're making sure that you're not bringing money from outside to come in. I found that astounding when I was filling out this form. I want to know where the money's coming from.
Well, it's anti-money laundering, so they're looking at corrupt money as well. That's why they're asking all these questions.
The other avenue is that a lot of them buy small businesses. You know, that's why the milk bars and the fish and chip shops and all those have kind of been taken over in that sense. But a lot of clients that I sell to end up to get their visa, they have to spend 5 million in Australia. So they'll buy 2 or 3 businesses to keep the money going in the economy, and that's how they turn over their money from China to here. And then they'll go buy the big house for, you know, $2 million or whatever it is, and $3 million worth of businesses, and they create their life here. You got to remember the average 2-bedroom apartment in Hong Kong right now sells for $2.5 million.
There you go.
And that's yen. That's not Australian dollars. So they come here selling a 2-bedroom apartment, and they've probably got 3.5 to 4.5 million Australian dollars.
Okay, I'm going to have to wrap this up now because we've actually gone 15 minutes overtime, but I'm sure that everybody has got a lot of information tonight, and the things I'm going to take away is really planning. Be careful when you giving money away. Lock in your interest rate. I think that's a really valuable piece of advice. And also, it goes back to doing your research. But I want to thank Kerry firstly. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and you're welcome anytime, Kerry.
I'm trying to encourage the Cohens to watch as well, to watch and listen with Kazzie Connect, and I'm pleased to see Sourasis was actually on the list tonight. Thank you, Sourasis.
Lovely. And Stasi, again, thank you so much for being part of our panel tonight, and it's wonderful to have you in our group. Nik, as always, the little guru, and where's Justin? Justin, you're terrific tonight, and thank you very, very much. Just one thing I want to mention to everybody, in that next month we've got a very interesting speaker in Pelagia, and excuse me here, but it's Marco Ginakakis. Now, it's on the 11th of November, and it's actually on Armistice Day. I met Pelagia at an International Women's Day function a few years ago, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to read this, but Pela's been in infrastructure for 35 years in the public and private sectors. She's also active and still active as a Deputy Director of the Navy Infrastructure. She was the first engineer on a submarine, and she's recently taken on a very senior role with Amazon. Now, Pela's heritage is Greek, and her father is from, now excuse my pronunciation here, but from Rethymor in Crete, and her mother's from Sparta. So it's going to be a very interesting session. So this will appeal to a broad demographic. So make sure your children are linked into this, because it's going to be and we're very, very lucky to have her. So on that note, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight and supporting Kazzie Connect. And I'm going to sign off. And certainly if you guys want to stay on, Connect is about keep talking. So if you'd like to do that, you're welcome. So good night from me. Thank you.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye all.